Welcome to Town Meeting TV's Under the Dome, where we are joined by local legislators to talk about what's been going on in Montpelier this legislative session. I am pleased to be joined today by Senator Keisha Hinsdale.
Thanks so much.
And we may also be joined by Senator Ginny Lyons, and if she does join us, we will sort of sneak her on. So Keisha Hinsdale, you graduated from UVM and attended the Kennedy School for Government. Mm-hmm. You have served as Head Start, preschool support, legal advocacy for domestic violence victims, and worked with the City of Burlington on municipal civic engagement.
Actually, all of that was within a couple square blocks of where we are now.
Yeah, that's right. We would cross paths on a regular basis. You were the youngest member ever elected to the House at age 22 in 2008.
I was the youngest that year in the country.
In the country.
So that's exciting. Yeah. I do think there's a couple men like Mike Obahowski served as the speaker. He had been elected at 19. So
I had no idea.
I might have been the youngest woman. I'm not sure anymore. But.
Okay. And then the first woman of color to serve in the Senate, elected
Still the only.
in 2020.
Yes.
Yep. You now serve as Senate Majority Leader. And is it true that you still sit on the Economic Development, Housing Committee, and General Affairs Committees?
Yes.
And for folks who don't know, senators sit on two separate committees as opposed to House members who sit on a single committee.
And so I left finance and went to education in the afternoon.
And you represent the Chittenden Southeast District alongside Senator Tom Chittenden and Senator Ginny Lyons.
That's correct.
So would you consider yourself now a senior member?
Even if I'm not ready to consider myself a senior member, I actually am.
Yeah.
It scared me just knowing we were going into a few different bienniums of a lot of turnover, watching more and more people I'd served with retire or leave. For one reason or the other, we had some big losses in our caucus in 2024, and so I'm among I can't find anybody else. I can't remember anybody else in the building who was elected in 2008.
Okay.
So that's not to say there weren't a handful of people elected before me.
Yeah.
But we are looking at
Senator Lyons being one of
Senator
those.
Lyons absolutely being a mentor for most of those decades.
Well, let's talk about that changeover. So this year, you talked about in 2024. So again, for folks, the Senate and the House sort of run on these 2-year bienniums, and the Democrats and the majority in both the House and the Senate, but you lack a supermajority. So the inability to override the governor's veto.
That's right.
And as the Senate Majority Leader, just talk about what that's been since 2024 to kind of navigate those waters and what that's meant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, I would say, like probably any other Democratic Senate colleague or any Senate colleague, it was always hard to get 20 votes for anything. I think that really started to look like an imbalance when the governor started vetoing quite a few bills. I mean, now Governor Scott does hold the record for the highest number of vetoes of any bills. And so, the year that we overrode 6 of his vetoes, I think it looked dramatic, like this supermajority can just do whatever they want. And at the same time, we're a really diverse group in the Senate. We come from every county in the state, every region of the state, and you don't find blind agreement on everything. So we'd already work intentionally to put together bills that a majority could support, but we had not been in the situation since 1997, before my time, of having just 2 above an even split. So we're 17-13 instead of 23-7.
Yeah.
You can feel the difference. I think the challenge that I felt is that when you just have that many new people coming in, they're not really ready to fire on all cylinders, and we were being asked to make systemic change. And so we had to do that without the same titans of the Senate that we might have had before, Jane Kitchell, Dick Massett, Dick Sears, Bobby Starr. You know, we had lost the institutions of the Senate, and so it was kind of up to people like me and Phil Baruth and Ginny and Ann Cummings, who had been there longer than a decade. And that's among the Democrats. You know, we have a couple Republicans who've served a long time as well.
Yeah. Well, talk about that when you say you could feel the difference. What is the feeling? Talk a little bit more about that. And maybe like, what were some of the big conversations, just from a high level, that were happening in the legislature?
Well, I would say there is a shift in the culture. I mean, let's start there, because it used to be valued to the, I started in 2009, and I learned from Democrats who had been in the minority. So they knew how important it was to listen to all perspectives. It was considered a virtue to go outside of your own district and get to know people all over the state, understand that the problems in Springfield, Vermont, or the Northeast Kingdom look different than they do in Burlington, and to be able to think about how to serve all Vermonters. You know, I would say as things have gotten more partisan and as resources have become more scarce, it's really hard to encourage people to work with folks of other parties or other backgrounds, and to get, you know, outside of their own constituency. People are feeling desperate to be heard right where they are. And, you know, at the same time, it's never been more important to get out of your own district. I mean, the places that have swung maybe further to the right politically are the places that still haven't recovered from the recession of 2008. And we might go back into another recession. So I'm seeing a lot of the same patterns, but without the same conscientious effort to meet in the middle and address those issues.
And there's only 30 of you.
And there's only 30 of us. So losing a lot of brain power, a lot of chairs, like the House is about to lose a lot of chairs, means you're losing an immense amount of institutional knowledge, and there's just no way to replace it.
Now, yeah, you're trying to like kind of move the curve, turn the curve on a lot of big ticket items. Healthcare reform, education reform was talked a lot about this year, land use reform, and then under this sort of push of threats from a federal overreach.
Right.
Both like the impact of federal overreach, you know, ICE's impact in the state, immigration,
loss of federal funds,
and then the loss of funding as a state that gets a large part of its budget. So, and you mentioned the scarcity of resources. So let's talk a little bit about that. How does that affect both your ability to talk with one another, but also how are you thinking about planning for that in the upcoming biennium?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll say people have asked, how do you feel the session went, or how are you doing? Because we just ended about 2 weeks ago.
Exactly.
And I'll say I'm really proud of all of us, you know, writ large. The legislature and the governor were able to generally find common ground that meant we weren't trying to do splashy things for the sake of having something big to go home with. We recognize that a lot of our systems are crumbling. A lot of people feel like they have the floor falling out from beneath them. They really do, with the renegotiation of our relationship with the federal government and the threat to safety people feel from, you know, what they're seeing in the news and what some of us went and witnessed and experienced even on Dorset Street in South Burlington with ICE. You know, us adding more chaos to their lives or trying to do huge reforms that cause them to have to, you know, change with yet another system.
Give me an example of something that might have been considered a huge reform, or something that was like a bigger ask than you thought people were prepared for.
I would say it really showed up with education reform and the idea of district reconsolidation. I think we finally were able to have a reasonable conversation with the Agency of Education and the governor that our proposal, which was a careful sharing of resources until districts could see, what future mergers might look like, was not as splashy, but was going to actually yield us cost savings. And the idea of just drawing new lines around school districts and making them much bigger was not supported by Vermonters, and it also was not going to save money or add value to the property tax relief conversation. So, there was a period of weeks where it felt like, what does the governor actually want for us to be able to go home? And I'm glad that it wasn't some, impossible goal that we were supposed to meet. And by the way, what I kept saying in Senate Education that I think Vermonters should really include in their conversations is that the most school districts in the country are less than 2,000 students. 70% of school districts in the country are about 1,500 students. You get to an average of 5,000 students when you include Boston and New York and really big districts. But we should pay careful attention to that because we're the most rural state in the country. And there was this idea that we can be just like everywhere else and get districts of 8 to 30,000 students. And nobody does that in the country. Nobody has geographies like that they're trying to cover. Massachusetts, #1 state for education in the country, their average district size is 3,000 when you take out Boston. And the largest district they have in the Berkshires, which is kind of like Vermont, is about 250 square miles. Some of the districts being proposed by the administration were 600 square miles. You don't get any efficiency out of that. You actually really just cause a lot of diseconomies of scale. You make parents and teachers and principals have to renegotiate a lot of what they're doing.
Do we have is there even that distance, 600-mile distance?
Square miles.
Square miles. I was like,
that,
what are you talking
that makes a difference, right?
Wait a minute, there's no, you can't drive, got a square mile.
But yeah, 600 square miles is like putting two counties together that are rural. It covers a lot of ground, and it's impractical.
And we've talked about that a little bit. So you're referring to the establishment of the CISAs, these consolidated education spending areas. Is that what it is?
Something like that. You're good because I haven't,
So we've talked about it a little bit with some other folks, but maybe just give us. So you're coming down on the side of like you feel good about the reform bill that's been put forth, and now. Has the governor signed it, or did he allow it to go in?
He hasn't done either.
He's done.
He has until end of next week.
Okay.
Okay. It has hit his desk. I think most everything has hit his desk at this
Budget
point.
hit his desk.
Yeah, major healthcare reforms. I'm pointing to the empty seat next to me. That Senator Lyons, did some incredible work on healthcare. We did some incredible work over the last 3 years on housing. People should also recognize that the property tax relief folks want to feel will require us solving mostly separate problems from district consolidation. And even the governor, halfway through the session, had to finally acknowledge that if we institute something like a foundation formula or a very tight excess spending penalty, we give certainty to the system of what each district is going to get per student, and it's very generous in comparison to other states. And then you layer on top of that trying to grow the grand list and, really trying to look at getting healthcare costs reined in. That's what's going to make people feel property tax relief in the demographic scenario that we're in, that it isn't pretty for, growing the youth population. So most Vermonters didn't want to harm their schools in the process of us trying to save money. And so, I think finally the governor relented because maybe people want to change, but they thought somebody else should change. And when it came down to, do you think it's going to save you a lot of money and do a lot of good to be in a mega school district, people could kind of see that that wasn't going to help.
And you got a lot of comments. You got something like 5,000 comments on that.
Oh,
And-
okay.
Yeah.
Glad we listened. Yeah, I mean, I felt like our committee traveled the state. We went to Canaan, we went, to Bennington, like we were all over the state
Yep.
looking at the problem, and there was no solving it just by turning the screws on school leaders.
Yep. So, again, these big ticket items, healthcare, housing, education, and there's hundreds of bills, well, thousands of bills that are considered, and then maybe a couple hundred bills that pass through that are granular. So bring us in to some of your favorites, your Spotify top 10 list of favorites. I know I've heard from folks the passage of the paraquat ban.
Yeah.
Again, some interesting legislation out of the healthcare committee around reference-based pricing. And
I'll give you a good one on economic development, because we also do consumer protection. And I think everybody has an experience with feeling like they're being fleeced for concert tickets or some kind of arts event. And so we had been looking at the issue of things like concert tickets like Noah Khan or other big names as a problem that had mostly to do with Ticketmaster and Live Nation and some federal lawsuits. But our arts community, which is so alive and well in Chittenden County, and the Flynn was at the table, the Arts Council was at the table, they were helping to inform us that these ticket resale companies, these platforms, they will go in and buy up rows of seats even at smaller venues like a Flynn. So people, as we as legislators were starting to see this whole issue with, like, why is it so hard to find the Flynn website instead of some other website that's trying to tell me it's $400 for Frozen tickets from Lyric Theater, Like, the question started to become, like, what is actually happening in this market? And there had been a lot of room for distortion, and just looking for people who you could maybe cheat out of something. You might still get a ticket, but they have no way of getting in touch with you if there's a change in your ticket. They have no way of refunding you. So these arts organizations really educated us that this is hurting them as nonprofits. It's making them look like, they are part of the Ticketmaster cabal. And so we passed a bill that includes a lot of new protections within the market, trying to end that practice of robocalling people out of tickets. I don't even know what it is now, kind of like bots online, but also setting a cap for how much you can resell a ticket for. And we tried to be very careful at the moment of just including Vermont venues. We don't have a Ticketmaster venue in the state. We have a lot of small, intimate venues being affected by this other part of the market.
Can you regulate a ticket vendor that doesn't do business directly or have business location in the state?
Well, we got into that question because we wanted to make sure that however broken the market is for tickets in Boston or New York or wherever, people still try to go access those venues. And they might lose the websites that are reputable at all in Vermont. And instead really have to go out on the open market where you get cheated entirely, somebody showing you a fake ticket. Interestingly, Canada has much stronger laws, and the only place I've seen really big shows is in Montreal because it's just a friendlier experience. So, but that was just an interesting one where we delved deeply into a group of states are trying to take the lead in limiting the power of this market. We will not be able to do, enough compared to national changes to Ticketmaster and things like that. But other countries just don't face the same, full capitalist forces just to see the arts and enjoy time with other people.
Anything from general affairs?
Gosh, so
what are you looking at? What came through the General Affairs Committee?
Well, so I. General affairs is a bigger part of our charge, and I became the tip of the spear on something that wouldn't normally be where I'd put a significant portion of my energy, but I've seen so much of the growth in the craft alcohol market that I wrote the first economic development bill for the craft cannabis market. All of the bills in the legislature that have come before were about legalizing the market, which is huge. But from there, it was a lot of, how do you slowly get the claws out of a commercial market? And this was, how do you actually grow local businesses that have a coherent set of rules to follow? And I chose to focus, significant attention on that this year because there's other major forces besides Vermont at play. As we started to talk about legalization, we were early. But at this point, all of the states around us have extremely mature markets and are taking business away from small Vermont businesses, and the federal government has made significant overtures that they're going to continue descheduling cannabis. And then we're going to see, just like with alcohol, our local craft spirits, have to compete with multinational spirits distributors. So how do we help a little bit, the quality and the integrity of our craft market? And some people, felt that was, cannabis has huge stigma around it. I'm a mom of 2 toddlers. I certainly don't want our kids to think just recreational use of cannabis is okay for their health and well-being. But it is a mature market, and most people who, overconsume or have some kind of problem, they haven't just gone to their local cannabis retail in Burlington or Essex. They've gotten something illicit, and our market should make sure there's less illicit activity.
So it sounds like you're hearing some pushback from folks, like, why are you spending time on this?
Why are you spending time on this? This will just promote more youth behavior, but actually what you see is that creating a safe and coherent market and an accessible market reduces illicit use, which is where you get the danger. So once I was able to have that conversation with a lot of medical folks, they could at least understand where I was coming from. The legislature legalized cannabis, almost a decade ago. And the question now is, is it better and safer to have your own local market than be at the whim of federal and outside forces in accessing that market?
Yeah. So that, leads me to think about, having spent a little bit of time as a citizen in the legislature, which is a citizen legislature, or as a visitor. You can go to the legislature if you're not a citizen, a visitor. It's very accessible. You can walk into committee hearings and listen in. You're hearing testimony from advocates, lobbyists, professionals, day-to-day folks. But give us a little picture of some of the voices that you heard this year. I'm hearing you're intimating it around the cannabis issue, and again around some of the healthcare stuff, and certainly around the tickets. Who are you hearing from? Who are you not hearing from? And whose voices are louder than the other voices?
Yeah. Well, not to completely depart from your question, but there's 2 significant events, that have shaped my experience differently this session. Number one, we have hit the year anniversary of Melissa Hortman's assassination as the former Speaker of the House in Minnesota. She was my friend in grad school, and I can't help but sit here today just thinking about how much that changed the way that legislators feel they're able to interact with their constituents. I've lived through.
Yeah, you have to walk through a metal detector.
We have a metal detector now. We have badges. I served through marriage equality, and we were sitting ducks if somebody wanted to do something, but we really could have faith in democracy and in the system to work. And now we're encouraged, not even to put our personal contact information anywhere. We'd be silly to do that, where I was so proud for many years that I felt I could put my cell phone number on my card and no one would abuse it. So we're in a different world. And on the very positive and hopeful side, we talked about I'm the second woman of color. I'm not only the first woman of color to serve in the Senate, I was only the second woman of color to serve in the House. And the first woman of color to get elected was 20 years before me, Luvinia Dorsey Bright. And
South Burlington.
yes, South Burlington, first black woman. It took us even longer to elect another black woman after my entry into the legislature. But we unveiled a portrait of her in the State House. There are 86 portraits in the State House. 3 are of women. 1 is of Alexander Twilight, a black man. That's it. So to unveil the first portrait of a woman of color in the hall I walk through every day was a really good reminder of who are we not hearing? Who are the voices that we're not listening to? I constantly do what I think great champions before me would have done and make sure we hear from students and, when we're talking about education, and make sure we're hearing from, busy nurses and home care providers and patients when we're talking about healthcare. Whatever it is, it takes a lot of careful intention and a lot of time management to hear from those voices that are not loud or are not organized in the building. And I think many of us are really proud that we try to do that still, even when there are a lot of forces that are making it more difficult.
Bring us a little in a granular way. I hope I haven't overused that term. I feel like so much that happens is in the details.
Yeah, and I'm usually such a nerd. Yeah.
And what does the Senate Majority Leader do? What is it? What are you doing? Who are you? And then we'll get a little to, because I know you've thrown your name in the ring for pro tem. And so we'll get a little into the leadership changes with both Jill Kowinski and Phil Baruth stepping down.
Yeah,
but
it's a big deal.
Civics 101, what does the Senate Majority Leader do? How do you spend your days?
Well, I will say this, and I said this on the Senate floor the day we were ending, that maybe it is the length of time I've spent and the changes that I've seen, but a wise Republican mentor of mine once said to me, if we're all doing our job well, then the majority steers the ship and the minority points out the rocks. So you can look at your job from a number of different angles. It can be to, try to throw the opposition over the side. It can be to sort of try and chart your own course. But really, it's trying to provide some steady leadership and to listen to Vermonters and make sure your caucus is listening to Vermonters. If you're in the majority, it means you're governing. And that doesn't mean you can ignore all of the people who didn't elect you. It means, you're shaping the agenda, but that agenda has to speak to a majority of Vermonters if you are going to enjoy the privilege of maintaining the majority.
Does this look like side conversations in the hallway? Does it look like making sure so-and-so and so-and-so have lunch together once in a while? Does it?
I think at some point, when you're in these leadership roles, you've been around long enough to tell some interesting stories or make some useful observations. So there's certainly that. We have to count votes more carefully. We had to know, could we bring something to the floor? Would it result in the lieutenant governor having a tie-breaking vote, which he
did
had
this year? Yeah, what was that on?
He had 2 that I'm recalling right now. One was on the Supreme Court nominations of the governor, very difficult one to navigate. And the second was a landlord-tenant bill.
Oh, that's
in
right.
fact.
Okay.
So.
And he sided in favor of it. Did he go against that one? I thought he sided in favor.
He went against the landlord-tenant bill.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. That one had a lot of weird, cross partnerships of who supported it and who didn't. We could get into that certainly, but we have to try and make sure our caucus is responsive, looks responsive, understands what it means to govern, but understand what it means if we don't have the votes to do something. And that was tricky. It was there hadn't been a majority leader who had this slim of a majority in the Senate in decades. So we were, there were a lot of people who thought, why can't we just pass this, So what if the governor vetoes it? Well, so what? Because that's a loss of time that we could have been spending on other things. That's more friction and, maybe less time on the things where we do have agreement. And the other part of my job was to try and make sure, I was traveling the state and finding the best people to run this cycle. That we were really trying to be more representative. We have a goat farmer running in Addison County. We have a maple sugarer running in Caledonia. We are trying to make sure our leadership is also responsive to their district. And, that is something we can never lose sight of. All while, having fire rain down on us by the federal government. So
yeah, somebody described it as a surreal experience to be legislating in a state where you feel like you need to protect residents from the federal government.
yes.
Which is not an unprecedented place to be at historically, right? Civil rights, certainly that has been a history. But I just thought it was an interesting way. And so maybe just to spend a little bit more time talking about that. What's that conversation been like on a partisan basis? What's it been like? What's
Yeah, I mean, I guess how I would encapsulate it is that uncertainty is extremely expensive and extremely draining. To be managing through crises that are man-made is, not where you want to be spending your time in government. Not, handling the problems you've received from the federal government, but looking to them to help you with the solutions. I mean, I've served through the recession, Tropical Storm Irene, multiple historic floods, a pandemic. When you run into the burning building, you want everybody to bring the water and to know what their job is and is not. And I have seen many administrations, come in to help, pretty much have saved our state and our country from bleeding out in certain economic events. And now it feels like, they're there to kind of step on our hands while we're holding on by our fingernails. And I don't know if I would call it surreal, but I think you have to be made for this moment. I think you have to know the difference you can make and where your constituents are kind of looking to you to do the best, most solid thing to step forward, not just sort of scream and shout about what's happening. That's how I see it when I talk to a lot of constituents. Everyone has a hard job right now. If you work in a hospital, your job has gotten harder. If you work in a school, your job has gotten harder. We are not immune from that at all, and we still need to protect those institutions, and we need to know the best way to do that.
Yeah. As promised, let's talk a little bit about the upcoming leadership changes. So Jill Kerwinski, who is the Speaker of the House, and Phil Baruth, who's our Senate Pro Tem, so the folks who stand at the podium and sort of direct and assign chairs to committees and decide really what legislation is going to get hearing on the floors.
Well, I chuckled a little bit
yeah.
because in the Senate president doesn't stand at the podium for the most part. It's the lieutenant governor. And I think, that is, it's like where there's only 30 of us, but nobody really wants anyone to be in power in the Senate. There's still a committee to assign chair roles, et cetera, that Senator Lyons serves on and the lieutenant governor serves on. So we have this 3-member group. So what's interesting is you almost have to have one person at the podium in the House because you have so many, you have 150 people. But in the Senate, everybody is in charge of their own destiny.
You're a little more collaborative.
Collaborative, yes. And, the Senate president really is trying to bring out the best in everyone, not kind of keep anyone in line.
So you've thrown your hat in the ring.
Yes.
You would like this job. Why?
Ooh, okay. I mean, I have spent 14 years in the legislature seeing all of these changes and different people in leadership roles, trying to build trust in government, trying to help us communicate better with our constituents. And I think it's something of a natural progression for somebody who, when there's so much turnover, is able to figure out what was best about these institutions that we need to keep, and what kind of change would free us up to meet this moment. And so, yeah, I mean, when you've had most of the other positions, it's not like you look at it as, the grand prize of being in the legislature. It's really, how do we make sure the best people are working on the budget, and the best people are working on policy matters, and the best people are keeping us safe in the building. You're just trying to do a lot of air traffic control. I really enjoyed being a committee chair, and I think it helps after you've been a committee chair to see what it takes to move a policy agenda forward. I don't think it looks easy to anybody given what's happening at the federal level, but to keep coalitions together and keep staying at the table, negotiating with the other chamber, negotiating with the governor, you have to know all of the tools that are available to you in your toolbox, and I think I've developed those.
And it seems like, despite the big change over in 2024 and a lot of new leadership, you have two appropriations chairs on the Senate and the House that get along really well. Mm-hmm. You had a budget conference committee that managed to close the gap between two sides in under a week.
Yeah,
it seems like like there's some folks getting some stuff done, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, what people only see the closer they get under the Golden Dome is that the people who are making sure that like we're not having train wrecks every day are not the most important people in the building. You still need those folks to steer everything in the right direction. And I was deeply impressed with, how our two budget negotiators and our chairs of appropriation handled things. Because even as someone in a political role is the majority leader, there were moments where our caucus wanted us to get political, right? And say, well, if we can't find agreement with the governor and he shuts the government down, it's on him. I learned, I was in the legislature in 2010, which was probably the first time in modern history that the legislature did override the governor's budget veto. And we didn't relish doing that, and that's why Republicans joined us. Because when you fight, Vermonters lose. Mm-hmm. So, I came up in a different school of thought that people don't want more fighting just because that's become the definition of success in government right now. They want to see us solve real problems, and I think our appropriations committees embodied that, didn't listen to the politics, negotiated, and got a very stable, nonpartisan budget in a very hard time to accomplish that.
That positive note seems like a good place to bring us to a close. I appreciate you spending your time. If there's anything more that you as we're sitting here and reflecting on this session, that you that felt like success to you, or that you felt like, I wish the governor had not vetoed that single thing, or this is your chance if there's something more to.
I will try to channel my good friend and mentor, Senator Ginny Lyons, because we don't know what the governor's going to veto. I don't think he's going to veto the big negotiations we've been having all session. But Senator Lyons did some incredible work on what it looks like to bend the future cost curve of healthcare, reference-based pricing, prescription drugs, a number of things that people are seeing the headlines that our hospitals, they're frustrated, they're laying people off.
They're losing money.
Losing money.
People aren't going, people aren't showing up because they're afraid of what it's going to cost them.
Right. We can't look at that and turn away and expect that problem to solve itself. And so when people see us do something and it looks like the system is being impacted, that's less of an impact than what it feels like to do nothing. And so, you know, Senator Lyons is looking at a lot of approaches to saying, this is our population and this is what we can afford. And it's similar to this school conversation. At some point, people need relief in order for it to be sustainable enough to survive. And we don't know right now if the governor is going to veto that S-190, that reference-based pricing bill, and the one that, frankly, is the only thing that really lowers people's property tax bill, is how we get a handle on our public sector healthcare.
Yeah, meaning healthcare costs are passed on. It's one of the biggest cost drivers in education.
Exactly.
And everything. In
Exactly.
the budget, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time bringing us under the dome. And thank you all for watching. You can continue to stay tuned here for more programming. And you can also watch us at youtube.com/Town Meeting TV. Thank you and be well.